Ceann Comhairle, I'm glad of the opportunity to speak tonight. I know many deputies have made points about the inadequacies in this legislation, and I think they need to be emphasised and re-emphasised. Last week in this House we passed the Finance Bill, and part of that bill and amendments to it were attempted to address the appalling vista that AIB Bank is going to pay no tax in this state for the next 20 years by having the ability to write off its losses as a result of measures introduced and facilitated by this government. And it's utterly galling for workers in the public sector who feel that it's precisely their pay cuts and reductions in their terms and conditions of employment which was used to fund the bailout of that very same bank. And now, not only is that bank not paying any taxation, but actually, as pensioners in the public sector pointed out to me recently, AIB have paid its staff increases at the expense, our public sector pensioners and workers would say, at their expense. They've directly funded it, and it's utterly galling. Now, obviously, we would be very glad to see any pay restoration, as indeed I'm sure the public sector workers are, after such a prolonged period of austerity. But it is, as other deputies have said, just a partial restoration, not full restoration, and it's certainly not a pay rise, which actually the present economic situation requires. I mean, years ago, say a nurse marrying a guard, you'd be considering you were made up, you were on the pig's back. Not anymore. A nurse and a guard now couldn't even afford to rent in this city, not to mind buy a house, with the cataclysmic increases that have been undertaken in the private housing market, with year-on-year increases in sales prices, 8% in 2015, 11.8% last year, 12.8% this year, and the ESRI predicting house costs to rise by a further 20% by 2020. Rent increasing by over 11% this year, and it's now 23% ahead of 2008 prices. So somebody starting out in the public sector isn't going to be able to put a roof over their head, and a couple wouldn't even be able to put a roof over their head. And if, God forbid, like many people who get together, they want to have a kid, well then their problems will really start, because they're not going to be able to fund anywhere for that child to go to a creche, with an average weekly cost of €174 for one full-time place. So we have to say that as our starting point, because that's the backdrop to the pay and conditions that we expect our public sector workers to endure. And the provisions in this bill, if you like, by contrast with the spiralling costs of living, are being offered on a piecemeal basis. And obviously, yes, 90% sounds good, but let's be clear, it's over 4 years and won't be complete until 2021. God knows what the prices are going to be at that stage. There are a number of very problematic measures with the legislation, as has been pointed out. It doesn't address the inequality introduced by FEMPI for new entrants. It proposes significant sanctions for members of unions who don't vote in favour, and it produces an additional pension contribution for public servants, which is in essence, let's be clear, a permanent pay cut. And in that regard, we certainly would be of the view that sections 21 and 33 should be removed from the bill. Now, obviously some trade unions have essentially been bullied into accepting the terms because of the chilling effect of a sanction, freezing increments if they don't vote in favour, and obviously their members are feeling the pinch and need their pay restored after enduring the austerity over the past number of years. But I'm glad to say that not all of the unions have backed down, and I do salute the efforts of the 3 teacher unions who voted against the deal and publicly stated their opposition to the bill, rightly pointing out that the legislation contains no reversal to the cuts to starting salaries of their members hired after 2011, but in contrast it does for us in here, for ex-Taoiseach and so on. So not only does the inbuilt inequality remain, But as has been pointed out, the unions and their members will be tied into those terms for the duration of the deal until 2021. And this is a serious curtailment on the freedom of unions to negotiate on behalf of their members, and the punitive powers contained in the bill for those unions who vote against the deal is an attack on the democratic wishes of union members, and their freedom to collectively bargain is being undermined, and I don't think that that is acceptable. Now, a lot of points have been made about the inequality that new teachers are expected to accept, and let's be clear, that's when they manage to achieve a full-time position, which comes after years of study and then probably years of being kicked around between one school and another on a partial contract. So it is unfair that they are disadvantaged, if you like. There's little point in us crowing about economic growth and so on if we don't have significant investment in education, health and social care, and that does mean paying workers fairly. I won't repeat the points that have been made, but what we're essentially saying is that the starting salary for teachers starting after 2011 is just over 30,000, when the average wage is 37,000. So on the current teacher pay scale, it's going to take 6 years to bring them up to the average industrial wage. But for other low-paid civil servants, it's even worse. 16 increments on the pay scale, which is effectively a 16-year wait for a living wage. And I don't think we can let the opportunity pass without highlighting the number of our public servants who are reliant on FIS. Absolutely ridiculous situation that we would have to dip in to the social welfare pot because we're not paying our public sector workers enough. It's utterly ridiculous, and the economic impact of that is ridiculous as well, because these are the people who go to the hairdresser, who go to the local shop and so on, and they are the ones who contribute to boosting the economy further. I don't have the time, but the position of nurses is the worst of all. A starting salary of $28,600. The low pay that is in that profession has absolutely gutted them, with the amount of people being recruited being wiped out by the numbers of those highly qualified, dedicated nurses who have been driven out of this country because of the longer hours and the lower paid that they are expected to work. Other countries such as the UK, the USA, Australia, Canada, Saudi Arabia are queuing up to employ our nurses trained here, which is just ridiculous, and it is a gutting done over the past 2 years. And we should make the point that these are professions that are dominated by women. We waffle on about gender inequality and all this kind of thing, but these are the ones who have been the hardest hit. And I think the last point, Count Corley, is, as our qualified nurses are being sought elsewhere and moved about because of the low pay here, we have the double whammy, if you like, that the HSE have to recruit nurses from other countries, in the main nurses from the developing world, a practice which is frowned upon by the International Labour Organization as an unethical practice, because we don't have a shortage of personnel here, we just have forced them out through low pay, and then we recruit from other countries where they do have a shortage of medical personnel. You couldn't make it up. It's unethical, it's unacceptable. The bill is going to have to be heavily amended in order to adjust the problem caused by FEMPI.
Thank you, Deputy.